Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Metarealism. I am wearing these glasses only briefly so that I can read a definition for you in just a moment. There is a concept in sociology called reflexive sociology. I won't get into the details of what that is because it is really not relevant to this podcast. Um, I thought yesterday that I had coined a new term called reflexive capitalism. Then I realized after Googling it that other people had used it before. However, I am going to use it perhaps in a different way, perhaps in a much different way than it has been used previously. So first, let me read you a very brief definition, really my paraphrase of a definition of reflexive. Being able to examine one's own feelings, reactions, and intentions, and how they influence one's behavior in particular situations. Okay, that's all I need the glasses for. Um, that concept of reflexive, which of course is an adjective and the corresponding noun, reflexivity, refers to basically um, being aware of oneself. I guess it is similar in a sense to the Buddhist concept of smrti, which is my best pronunciation from the Pali, which is generally translated mindfulness, but many scholars have suggested that a better translation of smrti is remindfulness. In other words, reminding oneself constantly of where one is and of what one is doing. So, in a sense, reflexive capitalism could also be thought of as mindful or remindful capitalism. Let me explain to you what I mean by that, and then I will relate it to a particular person, namely me, and then try to go beyond me. I don't want to spend all my time focusing on me because I'm a very boring person, and I don't think that you would like to hear about me all the time. Um, reflexive capitalism, as I thought about the term for the first time yesterday, is basically a type of capitalism in which one is aware of one's place in the capitalist system, of what one does, what one thinks, what one feels in relationship to one's accumulation of capital, and then how that reflexivity influences one's behavior. Um, as far as I'm concerned, um, well, I'm not really a capitalist. I've never actually owned a corporation um, or any kind of company per se, but I am quite wealthy, whether fortunately or I would say unfortunately, although I'm trying to make the best of it. Um, but if I can take that concept of reflexive capitalism in relationship to myself in a very loose way, I can see that the wealth that I have acquired was not due to my own efforts, at least not directly due to my own efforts, meaning I did not set out to become a multimillionaire, and yet that's precisely what I am, nouveau riche, but that was not my intention. If I had wanted to become wealthy, I never would have chosen to be a sociology professor because generally professors don't become wealthy. Um, we make approximately the same as physicians make, perhaps a bit more these days because of all of the added bills that physicians need to pay, like malpractice and so forth. But I never had a desire to be a rich man. That was never even in the back of my mind. I wanted to make enough money to survive and to retire without having to worry about paying my bills. That's really all I cared about. Well, turned out that I got more than what I expected. So if I think of myself, or maybe imagine myself as if I were a capitalist and I were in a similar situation, namely, I had this relatively large amount of money. That's the objective situation that I find myself in. What are my feelings, my reactions, my attitudes in relation to having that large amount of money? Well, for me, it is a sense of humility, a sense of having something that I genuinely feel that I do not deserve. When I say that, I am not being humble in the sense of being self-effacing. I am not trying to impress anybody by saying, "Gee, how humble I am," or even even not trying to impress anybody with humility. I am stating a fact. That is literally how I feel. I did not set out to make a lot of money, and yet that is precisely what I did. So that is my objective situation. That is where reflexivity begins. Any kind of reflexivity. Doesn't matter whether it's reflexive capitalism, reflexive sociology, or reflexive whatever. It begins by considering the objective situation in which one exists. So, when I realize that, when I acknowledge that, which I do, I've said that repeatedly in this podcast, maybe too frequently, but I don't say it to brag. I say it basically as a kind of almost repentance, because I literally feel bad that I have all this money, knowing that people in many parts of the world are suffering so much. So for that reason, when I say I don't deserve it, I am not being humble. As far as I'm concerned, I am being objective because I don't see why I deserve it. There is nothing I did in my life, as best I can see, that, for example, would make me more worthy of having this money than the average person in Gaza, or the average person in Haiti, or the average person in Pakistan, or Bangladesh, or India, or any one of many, many, many countries where the standard of living is extremely low. People don't make that much money. In some countries, people literally do not make enough money to keep themselves from not starving to death. And so people starve to death on a regular basis. As I talked about in a recent podcast, I was in such a place briefly in Kinshasa, in the Congo, where I saw dead bodies on the streets, where I saw people walking down the streets with bloated bellies, which is a sign of starvation. And I think, well, why shouldn't they have the money that I have? Whether the money I have is technically capital, which I guess it's not, or not, is to me not important. It's wealth. It's money that I can use pretty much to do whatever I want to do with. Give you an example. I got a call about an hour ago from my neighbor, David, and we are trying to save money on many aspects of this condo complex, trying to make up for some of the, let's say, misbehavior, the possible misbehavior of the previous board. And one way we are doing that is by hiring simply one landscaper rather than an entire landscaping team. Apparently, there was a problem when we did that many people on that landscaping team were literally stealing stuff from people's porches. That's kind of sad. That was the first I had ever heard of that, because my impression of those people, having seen them, is that they appeared to be very polite. Whenever anybody would walk by, like myself, they would stop, they would pause, and I would always smile and wave to them, and then go by to express my thanks, basically an acknowledgement that I recognized their willingness to be of service. But if they were in fact engaging in theft, I hope it's not that many of them, but certainly those who did that can no longer have my respect. Since I don't know how many of those people were engaging in theft, it may have only been a couple. I certainly will not judge from that particular account that my neighbor gave me to all of the other landscapers who worked on this property. By the same token, we have people living here in this condo complex who only have Social Security and Medicare. That's it. They have no pension, no retirement savings at all. And the previous board was attempting to raise the cost of the HOA fee to an exorbitant amount, which many people who live here simply could not afford. And there was mass panic. And as a result, I don't think that the board expected this, but the board was literally forced out. And now we have a brand new board. We were afraid that the old board, the members of the old board, would challenge us and would try to get back into power. They did not. I think that's at least some of them were afraid that if they did that, they might end up in serious trouble, which is true. Well, they might end up in serious trouble anyway. That is something that is not in my hands, but it certainly is being investigated right now. So, when I think of my wealth, regardless of whether it is capital, I need to consider what it is that I am going to do with that money. To a large extent, I have made certain arrangements already. I already give money to certain people, mostly through Patreon, which is an online site, patreon.com. A similar website is buymeacoffee.com, but at least as of now, I do not support that many people through Buy Me a Coffee. To my understanding, they are very similar sites. Some prefer one over the other. They each have their own advantages. But either way, right now I am attempting to help certain people. And I'm making arrangements so that my assets when I retire will go to help people who are needy. That is my objective. I was planning initially on setting aside some money to go to one of my relatives. I'll say that very vaguely. I have now changed my mind because of an estrangement between us. And now that money will not be going to her. None of it will be. The money will be going to help people who are needy. And this person I'm talking about is far from being needy. She does not need my money. She can function along fine without it. So, to me, that is a kind of example, an illustration of how reflexive capitalism can work. Let's take that outside of myself and my own activities. There are some corporations which attempt to practice what they call green capitalism. Now, as a communist, I don't care whether capitalism is green or reflexive or anything. I dislike capitalism. I hate capitalism. I want to see capitalism end and be replaced by socialism and then communism. That is at the forefront of my mind almost all the time. It's something I think about almost constantly. I work toward it both through critical realism and through Maoism, third worldism. And I think about the third world in particular because of its poverty and because I believe genuinely that the third world is our best hope for establishing socialism and communism. So, what I would say is this, that the best use of capital for those people who want to practice reflexive capitalism is to make sure that one's money goes to the needy. And ideally, that one gives up one's wealth almost entirely, or at least that one sells one's corporation. Perhaps even better would be to collectivize one's corporation so that one is no longer the capitalist who owns the company. Instead, the company is owned by the workers. Most people have heard of profit sharing, and they think that profit sharing is a kind of communism, which it is definitely not. Whether it is better than ordinary capitalism can be debated. I'm not going to speculate on it since I'm not an economist. That's not my area of expertise either. But profit sharing simply means that one sets aside a portion of the earnings, maybe the stocks of the corporation, and gives them to the workers. So, for example, there might be a mutual fund, and workers may receive a mutual fund which increases in value or correspondingly decreases in value relative to the success of the company. The idea behind that, I think, is reasonably good, but not good enough. That if workers believe, perhaps justifiably, that if they work hard, it will benefit not only the company, but themselves, since the company is the workers. That's a good idea. That comes close to socialism, but not close enough, because even under profit sharing, there is still capitalism. Many corporations which practice profit sharing also are on the stock exchange. People can buy and sell stocks in the company. You may have a leader, a capitalist, who maybe owns most of the shares, but the workers own small amounts of those shares. So literally, it is profit sharing, right? Sharing, meaning some shares go to the workers, but the majority do not. So profit sharing is really simply, I guess you can say, an attempt to develop a kind of humanitarian form of capitalism. But I don't care whether it's humanitarian or not. To me, if it's capitalism, it's capitalism. It can be as humanitarian as one wants it to be, but it's still a system based on what Adam Smith, arguably the founder of modern capitalism, in a sense, wrote about in Wealth of Nations and his other writings, that capitalism is the best economic system for human beings because, according to Smith, human beings are, by natural law, greedy, meaning we are naturally greedy, naturally selfish. And considering that, if one makes that assumption, which I don't, that people are naturally selfish and there's nothing higher than that, to me, that would be what Roy Bhaskar, the founder of critical realism, calls demi-reality, which is the kind of reality that one needs to work to eliminate, not to encourage. But in capitalism, demi-reality, or greed in this case, is literally promoted. People are encouraged to be greedy. Greed is seen as being a desirable condition. And that is pretty much the idea in capitalism in general, that greed is a good thing. Nothing wrong with greed, since that's a part of who we are, or maybe that is who we are. It may be a part of who we are, but it is a very lowly or lower part of who we are. If we are nothing more than greedy individuals, then why are we even here? So to me, reflexive capitalism would be a capitalism which would promote capitalism as a vehicle for transcending it. That sounds a bit complex, doesn't it? So let me explain what I mean by that. By promoting a mechanism or promoting a means to transcend capitalism, I think that the only good that can come out of capitalism is its own destruction. And so if a capitalist is truly reflexive, that capitalist would, I think, recognize that she or he does not deserve the wealth that she or he has, much as I, even though I am not a capitalist, have a certain amount of wealth, and I recognize that I literally do not deserve it. And there are people who are more worthy of that wealth than me. So, point is that what reflexive capitalism, in my opinion, should do is that it should work toward its own destruction, meaning reflexive capitalism should develop as a means to destroy capitalism. Because once one is a capitalist, I would assume, though I'm not one, and one sees that one has this exorbitant amounts of wealth. I mean, how many billions of dollars can a single person use? How many millions of dollars can a single person use? I look at myself. all the money I have nothing to do with it. I have no use for it. Literally no use for it. I mean, I guess if I wanted to, I could get a plane, although I can't fly. But I don't want a plane. If I wanted to, I could buy a large mansion, but I don't want a large mansion. I guess if I wanted to, I could get a big Rolls Royce, but I don't want a big Rolls Royce. So I think that basically reflexive capitalism could just as easily be called reflective capitalism, meaning that as one reflects upon one's wealth, one should recognize that that wealth is entirely unnecessary. So the only type of capitalism that I think should exist in the world right now is reflexive capitalism. In other words, capitalists should begin to acquire the knowledge that the money they have, the capital that they have acquired, is basically of no use to them in the long run. They don't need that much money. Who needs hundreds of millions of dollars or billions of dollars or whatever? I don't think anyone does. And so a reflexive capitalism is a capitalism which works toward communism. One could even say that reflexive capitalism is a prerequisite for moving from capitalism to communism. Perhaps another way to move toward capitalism, from capitalism to communism, is revolution. But even if there is no violent revolution, one might consider reflexive capitalism as a kind of revolutionary activity. Perhaps one might call it a nonviolent revolution. If enough capitalists gave up on the idea of acquiring wealth and simply decided that the money they had is not benefiting them in any way, it's simply gathering dust, then they would simply give up their money and collectivize their companies. So that is what I personally mean when I say reflexive capitalism. That is different from most uses of the term. People have generally used the term reflexive capitalism who support capitalism. I am using the term as a commie, as somebody who does not support capitalism. So to me, reflexive capitalism contains within it the seeds for the destruction of capitalism. Or perhaps one might say that reflexive capitalism itself is that seed which will lead to the destruction, or which could lead to the destruction of capitalism. So basically, my purpose in making this podcast was to offer a different kind of critique of capitalism, one that I have not seen before, and literally one which just occurred to me yesterday, of what value capitalism could be to the modern world. Because we're stuck with it for now. It is the economic system, the capitalist world system, as sociologist Emanuel Wallerstein called it. And why not try to take that capitalism that we have and use it to transform our economic system from a capitalist world system into a socialist and a communist world system. That would require, of course, that individuals, capitalists, accept my idea, accept the idea that they don't need the money that they have. Do I have any hope, in conclusion, that there will ever be a successful type of reflexive capitalism? No, I don't. I don't. I hope I'm wrong. But when I see the way in which many capitalists treat money as their own, I own this and you don't. If I want to, I can spend my money in a way that will benefit you. In a sense, that's what I'm doing with my money. I don't know what the alternative is. I mean, I am deciding who to give my money to. But reflexive capitalism, I don't think is going to lead to socialism and communism, because to do that, reflexive capitalism would need to be adopted by a sufficient number of capitalists who basically regard capitalism as a mechanism for its own destruction. And as I see it, that is the causal mechanism that capitalism should become, a self-destructive causal mechanism, a means to go past it, to surpass it, to collectivize that money. But again, I'm not watching the clock. I'm not looking through the door, waiting for somebody to come through it and say, okay, here we are, all the capitalists, the major capitalists in the world, ready to give up our money, ready to collectivize our corporations. No, I don't think so. I would like it, but I don't think it will happen. And so sadly, I am afraid, in a way, that revolution of some sort is the only route that we have to reach socialism and communism, because I don't think that reflexive capitalism can, at the present time anyway, be successful. And in my view, we have basically run out of time. For now, this is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Meta-Realism. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.